First of all, we need to look at outlining the presentation. This is to provide the structure of the presentation of your talk so that your audience or whoever you are talking to can follow you clearly. So we call these signposting phrases. It shows us clearly what the next step will be. When you're introducing your talk, you could start by saying, the purpose of today's presentation is to, or I'd like to give you an overview of what we're going to look at today. And the starting point, to get started, let's look at my first point, covers. So we're indicating where we are. Moving on, this signals we're going to change slides. We're going to move on to a new topic. But now I'd like to turn to, or this leads me to my next point. When you are referring to visuals on the screen, it could be a graph, a diagram, then you can say, as you can see on the screen, or this graph illustrates. Summarizing, as we get towards the end, is to recap the main points, or let's briefly go over the key findings. And then concluding, we can say, in a nutshell, or I'd like to leave you with this final thought. So as you can see on this slide, it gives us our outline of the talk and the phrases that you will need to then move through the structure of your presentation clearly so that everybody understands. In our next section, we're now going to look at the vocabulary for trends and data. So we don't want to use increase and decrease all the time, or go up and go down. There are a lot more better words that we can do to sound more professional. So here we have 3 columns. We have the upward trend, the downward trend, and stable or fluctuating. So first of all, stable means it's consistent, it's level. So if we have a look at to remain stable is to stay the same. Fluctuating is to go up and down. So let's have a look through the upward trends. To soar or rocket, it means to go up, but very fast. A surge or jump is an increase, but it's a sudden change. To rise or grow, just in general, and to reach a peak. We use this term when our graph reaches a peak and then perhaps drops or remains stable after that. To talk about a downward trend or a decrease, we could say plummet or plunge. This is a very fast fall. To slump or to tumble, we hear this often when people talk about stock or shares. If they suddenly fall, they slump or tumble. To fall or decline, in general, a decrease. And to hit a low point. So this would be the opposite of reaching a peak. You hit a low point at the bottom. And if your graph is more stable, we could say it leveled off or is leveling off. Or to plateau is to stay at a high constant level. Fluctuate, we talked about, is to go up and down. Or to remain stable, to stay the same. Now our next section here, we're going to look at the adverbs, because this is the how things are changing when we are describing our trends. So let's look at some examples of how we can make it more descriptive. So we pair these adverbs with the verbs to describe the speed or size of the change. So if we have significant, or dramatic, or sharp, it is a large noticeable change. For example, we can say prices rose sharply. Steady or gradual is a slow but consistent change. E.g., usage grew steadily. Slight or marginal, it's a very small change. There was a slight dip in profit. And if something is consistent or constant, it's change that doesn't stop. So it could constantly be small fluctuations, a consistent increase over the last few years. I want you to take special note of the way we structure the sentence here with the adverbs. So if we start with prices, the subject, okay, then we say rose sharply, ly. Usage grew steadily, ly. If we start with just a sentence structure, there was a, there has been a, or there is a, then it's a slight dip in profit. So that is how to know whether or not you're going to use ly on your adverb, or if you are going to just use a slight dip. If we rephrase this, we could say profit dipped slightly. For the first one, if we want to change it, so instead of prices rose sharply, there was a sharp rise in prices. So we've looked now at how we start the layout, the structure, and the phrases that we need. We've then looked at some alternative vocabulary for increase, decrease, go up, go down, so much more professional vocabulary and more descriptive. Joining it with adverbs, again, to more clearly describe what is happening. And now we need some transition words so that we can take this to another level to tell the story about what has happened. So here we have some examples of transition words that you can use. So if you want to show a contrast, maybe prices increased sharply. On the other hand, profits have increased slightly. So we could use for the contrast conversely, on the other hand, or despite this to show a contrast. If we want to show an addition, we could say moreover, or furthermore, or in addition, to add something extra to what we're saying to describe the graph. A result, we could have consequently, or as a result, or therefore, to explain that because prices increased sharply, as a result, we've had to reduce the costs. And we could also use the last one to give examples. We could say, for instance, or to illustrate this point, or take the case of prices in Q3. So let's have a look at a real-world scenario so that you can see how this is used. Here is the case study, just to give you the background and the data. And then next, I'm going to let you listen to the audio of the presentation. It will be me speaking, so you can hear how the phrases are used and how the words that we've learned are used in this presentation. So let's start with the case study, the rise and stabilization of EcoStream Tech. Background: EcoStream Tech, a renewable energy startup, faced a volatile market in its first 3 years. Initially, their market share fluctuated as consumer trust was low. However, following a major government subsidy, their sales began to grow steadily. Volatile, it means that it is very much up and down, fluctuating a lot and very unpredictable. The data. In 2023, EcoStream saw a dramatic surge in subscriptions, causing their valuation to soar. By mid-year, they reached a peak in regional dominance. Conversely, their main competitors saw profits plummet due to outdated tech. Recently, the market has begun to plateau as it reaches saturation, and EcoStream's growth has leveled off. Consequently, the company is now focusing on international expansion to avoid a potential slump. Right, we're going to move on to listening to the presentation next. Hi, my name is Sarah. I'm the Marketing Director. Good morning, everyone. The purpose of today's presentation is to analyze our Q3 performance and outline our strategy for next year. I'd like to give you an overview of our recent market shifts. To get started, let's look at our user acquisition numbers. As you can see on the screen, our subscriptions jumped significantly after the July campaign. This graph illustrates how we managed to reach a peak of 50,000 active users in August. Moreover, our retention rates have remained consistent throughout the quarter. Now I'd like to turn to our international pilots. While domestic growth has started to plateau, our European trials have grown gradually. To illustrate this point, take the case of our Berlin branch, where sales rose sharply in just 2 months. Despite this, shipping costs have also risen, which has led to a marginal dip in our net margin. This leads me to my next point, sustainability. We need to ensure our profits remain stable, even if domestic demand begins to decline. Therefore, we are investing in local manufacturing. To recap the main points, we've seen our valuations soar due to domestic success, but we must adapt as the market starts to level off. In a nutshell, we are strong, but we must diversify. I'd like to leave you with this final thought. Stability is not the absence of change, but the ability to manage it. After testing our listening with the audio that you listen to now of the presentation, here is the transcript. So I'm going to read through it again, just so you can pick up on any words that you might have missed. Good morning, everyone. The purpose of today's presentation is to analyze our Q3 performance and outline our strategy for next year. I'd like to give you an overview of our recent market shifts. To get started, let's look at our user acquisition numbers. As you can see on the screen, our subscriptions jumped significantly after the July campaign. This graph illustrates how we managed to reach a peak of 50,000 active users in August. Moreover, our retention rates have remained consistent throughout the quarter. Now I'd like to turn to our international pilots. While domestic growth has started to plateau, our European trials have grown gradually. To illustrate this point, take the case of our Berlin branch, where sales rose sharply in just 2 months. Despite this, shipping costs have also risen, which has led to a marginal dip in our net margin. This leads me to my next point, sustainability. We need to ensure our profits remain stable, even if domestic demand begins to decline. Therefore, we are investing in local manufacturing. To recap the main points, we've seen our valuations soar due to domestic success, but we must adapt as the market starts to level off. In a nutshell, we are strong, but we must diversify. I'd like to leave you with this final thought. Stability is not the absence of change, but the ability to manage it. You've learned a lot of new vocabulary and phrases today, and you've looked at the case study to see how it all fits together to structure your presentation. So let me know, which of the words are you going to use in your next meeting when you are presenting to your team?